Welcome to No Recipe Required. I've got a pasta dish for you tonight that I'm really excited about. Super simple to do, there's really barely any cooking here. I'm going to make a pesto. This one is a basil almond pesto. Traditionally made with pine nuts. I'm swapping out almonds. Gives it a little bit of a different flavor. Easy to do with all kinds of different nuts. You can even do pestos with other herbs, even with things like olives. I'm going to take that pesto, mix it with some spaghetti for just the traditional spaghetti pesto. Let's go ahead and get to it. Okay, let's go ahead and make our basil. Now, what I've got here, this is a full bunch at the store, and I've just pulled off, the biggest stems. I don't really worry about if I've got some of that stem there, the medium size. That'll all it'll all be just fine. This is about, I'd say, 2, loosely packed cups worth of basil. And I'm dropping it into some boiling water, really just to blanch it and cook it just a tiny bit. I prefer this method. If you want to keep it raw, you can certainly do that. I've seen some people do that. You do want to make sure it's nice and clean, and then you also want to have an ice bath, which is really just exactly what it sounds. Water with some ice, nice and chilly, standing by, because we're going to remove the basil from the water, drop it in the ice bath to shock it, stop the cooking process, and preserve that nice green color. Okay, my basil's done, so I'm just going to slide that over. We'll turn that burner off, and I'm going to drop the basil, like I said, into my cold water. And this is going to help set that color. One of the things you really want in a pesto is to have that nice bright green color, and doing this will certainly help preserve that. So let me just I'm just going to let this cool. Then remove the leaves again after a minute and drain them well on a paper towel. We've got our basil here that I've just blanched off. Now, one of the nice things about pestos is that 20 seconds of blanching the basil, that's about the only cooking we're going to need to do. I'm going to add a little bit of salt to my basil, a little bit of pepper. Now, this pesto, we're using almonds. I've got almonds. They're peeled here. You can use unpeeled. You can use almost any nut you want. This happens to be an almond basil pesto. And I'd call that, maybe 2 to 3 tablespoons. I don't really measure a whole lot. It's kind of by feel. About the same amount in terms of volume of Parmesan cheese I sprinkle in there. I like to put a little bit of lemon juice. So squeeze in there, just maybe a teaspoon or so. And then some olive oil. And that's going to kind of hold everything together. Then we drop our top back on. We give it a few pulses. It usually helps like that when you're mixing things to pulse a few times, get things started, and then you can turn it on and let it go full bore. This will probably take a minute or two before it really becomes nicely homogenized. So, about halfway through, you're going to have to come down and kind of scrape down the sides. The blades are going to throw some pesto, some basil, some nuts up on the edges, and you got to get those done. And then what I realized I forgot to add were a couple cloves of garlic. Pretty key ingredient to a pesto like this. I like to just give it a good whack on my cutting board, flatten it out, make the blades a little bit easier or make it a little easier for the blades to chop through it. If you forget it like this, no problem. You just add it in later and pulse again. Okay, so I've got the pesto down to the consistency that I'm looking for. Some people like it chunkier, some people like it smoother. Really a matter of personal preference. Just gave it a taste. That was definitely missing that garlic the first time. But we are good to go. Okay, once our pesto is made, the spaghetti part is obviously pretty easy. For 2 people, I'll use about 1/3 of a pound of pasta. You want to make sure you put it in super hot or boiling, obviously, salted water, and it'll push down in a minute or so. And once it does, you want to be sure to come back and give it a few stirs to make sure the pasta doesn't stick together. Take about 7, 8, 10 minutes to cook. I start checking it around the 7-minute mark. You want to make sure you don't overcook that pasta. And then once it's done, we're just going to toss it with our sauce, and we're essentially done. Okay, our spaghetti is cooked, so I'm going to go ahead and drain it. But before I do, we're just going to grab a little pasta water to hold in reserve. You never know when you might need some. And I'm going to drain it. We'll come back. We'll put the pesto together. Okay, I've got my freshly drained pasta, and I'm going to add that to a aluminum bowl. Well, any bowl you want, mixing bowl. And then I've got my pesto here, and I'm going to add in a couple tablespoons, probably 4 tablespoons of pesto to start with. Before I even bother mixing it, I'm also going to add some olive oil. Pretty key to this dish. A few tablespoons, a bit of lemon juice, some salt. Now obviously we salted the pesto, but we never salted or peppered or seasoned the pasta, which we need to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and toss everything together. And then depending on how that initial balance of pasta and pesto goes, we can add a little bit more, or well, we can't take any away. We can always add more. That's why we go a little bit light at first. And this is also looking a little bit dry, which is why we reserve some of that pasta water. I know we're going to need some more pesto as well. You don't really want to overpower the pasta, but you definitely need it fully coated all around. I'm going to do one more glug of olive oil. And if you've got a good olive oil, you definitely want to use the best that you have or that you have access to. And this is looking good. Let's go ahead and serve up our pesto spaghetti. Okay, to serve it up, we've got our pasta bowl here. You want to make sure you get a nice fresh toss on the pasta. Pile it up with that nice twisting motion to make sure it stays good and high. I like, for dishes like this too, I like to heat my pasta bowls because it didn't come right out of a pan. You want to make sure everything stays good and hot. And there you've got our spaghetti with almond pesto. I'll see you next time on No Recipe Required.